Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on cybercrime with Tiger Graph and machine learning. I'm Scott Heath. I'll be your tour guide today as we walk through this session. What I've got on tap for you today is talking a little bit about the background of why this is so challenging, why graph databases are so unique, and more specifically, how they can help. The other part to that is I'm going to give a demonstration, and then we're going to look at, again, sort of how these things work together and why is Tiger Graph so much different than some of the SQL databases and some of the other kinds of machine learning that we do today, but excited to get into it. With that, let's talk a little bit about sort of what these different elements are. And as you look here, obviously we all understand the impact, and given the world events today, the numbers are staggering. But what we see here, though, is that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether you're in energy or you're in healthcare, et cetera, and that the numbers, again, are far bigger, and they're getting sort of more complicated, and their attack vectors are, again, getting more deep. When it comes to just simple things like ransomware, what we found was in the old world, we would get an email or something simple and we would click on it and then it would cause mayhem. Well, today's are far more sophisticated. They're looking, they're acting, they're finding sort of how can they get in. They're coming in different ways. And again, they're far more sophisticated, but the ransomware, the money is real. These things are getting locked up, and there are many cases they're getting paid, which none of us want to be a part of. And so how does a graph database start to factor into that? That's really kind of where we're headed here. Now, when we look at what goes on here, you may see a normal file. There may be some sort of encryption key, and then it starts to spawn and do different kinds of activities. Those are all aspects of far more sophisticated methods to do that. And for those that try and hold back, the consequences can be devastating. So how can a graph database start to do and help those things is again, really where we're going here, is we can start to see these things in real time. Now, there's lots of other products out there like Splunk and other kinds of things. We'll show today how this really fits in line with some of those other products and actually can enhance or make those things better. So when we start to look at the different commonalities, there's not just a single element. We may be seeing sort of coordinated attacks. We may see ransomware. We may see phishing. We may see an insider. We may have these other kinds of forensic capabilities where things are happening in coordination. It's not just a single silo where we can put up a good firewall. There are multiple sort of angles that we'll see in today's discussion. Now, what are those, right? So this is kind of where we're talking over on the left, which is whether you start with cyber or malware, and we'll see a demonstration of what that looks like. Or you're actually part of how does that then factor over into money laundering or ID theft, or whether it's IoT, how did they get into my network? How did they make or create those items, right? And they start to infect in multiple vectors. In some cases, we've had customers where what they originally thought was an acceptable amount of loss in either a credit card or AML, when stepped back and using a Tiger Graph solution, what we were able to find is $20 million kind of a loss as they were working through different silos. And that was a huge sort of awakening on how these things are now being far more sophisticated over on the left. Now, what are we really trying to do? We're trying to show human beings in this process. So level 1, level 2, whether you're in the cyber team or money laundering, how do you get those visual components? How do I get shown what these problems are, this root cause and investigation or mapping or geospatial? All of those elements are part of the human in the loop. What we need to be able to do is use the Tiger Graph technology over on the right for patterns. How do we find this prediction? How, if we could predict and score things in a history, and then look at how they're changing over time, right? Being able to bring that power of the graph capability in addition to what we're doing in SQL. I think that's the other core takeaway here, is that a Tiger Graph doesn't have to be a standalone. Obviously, each customer is different, but typically they're used in conjunction with multiple kinds of technologies. Now, when we see this on a map, what we find is many companies are moving towards machine learning. And what we see is there is a big boost versus the Boolean logic and SQL kinds of deterministic outcomes. But when we start to give graph that secondary component, it now can move the needle significantly. Then finally putting it in an interactable or easy to use way is really where we can do that. And then the human, the knowledge that persons have on what look like fake trees or attack vectors or blast radius or any of these other elements can really boost this. And now what we see is in some cases 60 to 80% boost in accuracy, lowering false positives by 50 to 80% as well. And so this is a very, very important concept for how these things all work together. And again, that's what you would expect, and that's what we start to see now with the power of a Tiger Graph. Now, these are examples, right? Your mileage may vary as they do in some of these, but we'll see an example today where whether it's inside trading, where team members are working with external bad actors to get in, and there may be something where the gatekeeper is not quite covered, right? Or we start to see cyber or malware, and then we can see the fact that a Tiger Graph is actually a lot like a Swiss Army knife. I can do all of those different kinds of use cases, and what we see here are some sample numbers within that. And again, over time, these tend to get better as the human and the coordination of a graph database are trained inside of our model. Now, why is this so important now? It's kind of as my 10-year-old daughter says, duh. It's the pressure now is unreal, right? We have to do more. We can't go hire or double our staffs. We can't continue to tell regulators or those kinds of firms, or our stakeholders or the market that we didn't do enough, right? And then COVID has just really exacerbated this. Now, why is this such a great reward? Is if we get it right, and some of our customers, they're implementing or adding this on in as fast as 10 to 14 weeks. They can see that demonstrable change. And that idea of a bolt-on. So regardless of what you have today, you can still use that infrastructure to supercharge that. Now, the second part to this is, where are you in the loop? So today, if you're more of a DBA or IT team, or team members that are sort of down there in the bottom of our graphic here, the Tiger Graph Studio is a fabulous way to do that, right? It has a good interaction. You can write your models, et cetera. What we start to see now is part of the toolkit that Xpero brings to the table that bolts right in. You don't have to do any configuration, heavy lifting or development. It's really sort of how do we set that up per user? And what we see then is each user touches this capability in a different way. And there are different screens, as we'll see in the demonstration here in a minute, for what these look like. They're very easy to configure. We have the ability to do that. But again, what we're trying to do is get that explainable machine learning, get the answers to the team members in a way that they can understand it, so that they can basically stop and start to improve what we're doing here. Now, what is this? It's powered by Tiger Graph. We refer to it as the connected for financial crimes. And again, it can be used for cyber, can be used for anti-money laundering, can be used for lots of these use cases. But in the end, if it can increase the accuracy, decrease the false positives, then we've somewhat failed in what we're doing. But the takeaway now is that we have empirically showed that it absolutely helps in that process. In this entire suite, so the ability to use or leverage Tiger Graph for what it's really, really good at, and then be able to put it in a human way is what we'll see today. Now, these different modules, again, these are optional. You don't have to buy these within sort of the Tiger Graph ecosystem. But again, these are designed to get you closer to solving the problem. So whether it's an exploration workbench to be able to see all of the connections, the unintended sort of places that these things have gone, we'll see that demo here in a minute, or it's to alert management or case management, et cetera. And these are they're flexible and they bolt on. But what is it that this really does now? What we see then is the heartbeat of this is really inside of Tiger Graph, this scoring engine. Again, if you have other systems today like Splunk or Databricks, et cetera, but what the system is designed to do now is make those connections, find out MAC IDs and intrusion detection from your raw devices, whether you're using Splunk or other kinds of products, and your internal systems. Are these known quantities? Are they blacklists from the third party or the government? By doing that as an early step, I can start to now, in as fast as 5 to 10 milliseconds, identify complex networks, 10 to 20 hops of how these things are basically all connected. And that's really what we're trying to do now, is take all of that smart learning down here at the bottom and put it into a dashboard, put it into a color code, put it into something that a human can digest. And then as they find information, they can basically send it back to Tiger Graph and make it even stronger still. So That's what that looks like. Now, how do we do this? So we have different kinds of those user interfaces, right? We have the ability to show things in badging. We have the ability to show in the bottom section that maybe I want to see malware and what it's doing. These are all connections as nodes and vertices inside of TigerGraph. Now, some people like to see it in this view as a network diagram is what this is typically called, but there are other ways to see it. So the same data can be showed in just simple rejection or acceptance or on a map. Or in our bottom right hand down here, we can see what those features are, but they're put into a more normal way that people are used to seeing. They're grids. Now it's still connected to TigerGraph. It still has that capability to do it, but again, it's pleasing to perhaps this is a level 1 investigator, etc. We can see time. We can see that in different ways. We can see impacts of time. We can see where things were happening, correlation, the ability to find or predict, which is the other sort of core power of what TigerGraph can do. We can also see things in different ways. We can combine them. We can show what the actions were in our network diagram over to the right. We can have pop-ups of why things were risky, again, leveraging those 70+ algorithms inside of TigerGraph. But again, I'm putting this in a very simplistic way that this user understands that this is a problem and that with this many kind of occurrences of different elements, I'm able to go finalize what those are. But again, that configurability, or I can follow, basically follow a trace. I can dig in. I don't know where this is going to lead me. I need to follow whether, again, in this case, it's an intrusion, and we'll see this in the demo here in a minute, but show me what I need to see. Maybe I'm a level 3 investigator. Or now, how do I tune that algorithm? How do I go in and say, well, maybe it's changed. Maybe there's communities of things yesterday that are not the same today. How do I then show that accuracy? How do I run those queries? How do I change with that? And what this allows now is a super user in a business interface to go in and do that. And now in the TigerGraph Studio product, I'm able to author those, but this now allows sort of control from folks that are perhaps in that different value chain. Now, finally, what I'd like to do is pop over and show you a quick demo. In my demonstration here, what I'll do is I'm going to walk through a couple of different items here as I do this. Now, in this particular demonstration, what I can see now is this may be a dashboard. This may be your Tableau sets of functionality. These may be screens that you already have. And what we want to do now are these are widgets from our dashboard that can fit inside of that. So this alert digital element here, and again, you may have news or other kinds of things that are there. But what I'd like to do now is let's dig in. I want to go see what is that signal? What is that beacon? And in this case, what I can see is I have this host that looks like it's under attack. Well, clearly that's bad. I can start to click on what those different elements are here. What I see is obviously this is risky. Now, where does this take me, right? I can see that there was a blacklisted, basically a domain. There is other kinds of elements here that are clearly, bringing my attention to what these different kinds of elements are, and what is this that I want to do. So how far did this go? Maybe what I'd like to do is create now an alert. In this case, what I want to do now is create for a deeper link. Is there more going on behind the scene, and where does this breach start to take place? So what I'm doing is I can go build this. I can build criteria. Now, for those that are familiar with the TigerGraph Studio, these are those Gsql queries. What I'm doing here is I'm basically writing or concatenating in sort of a Boolean way those Gsql queries, but I'm doing it as a business user. And what I can say now in this case is maybe that blacklisted URL within 10 degrees or hops. What are those different elements? I want to look for connections where this anomalous activity has been associated with previous either malware or fraud in a detection. So now what I've done is I've supercharged my Boolean logic with the TigerGraph algorithms to go do that. Now what I can do is I can attenuate that. So I can look at, well, is this connected to someone on a blacklist or a PEP list? Is there a PageRank algorithm for risk or order? Is there a geography feature that we need to add to it, or similarity to previous attacks or communities of these attacks? And so I've chosen all of those in this case. Now what I can do then is what do I want it to do afterwards? In this case, what I can do is I can say, well, I'd like to run this all day in a streaming manner. Then what I'd like to do is if I have a hit, I want to show it in a dashboard, which is what I saw previously. But now what I'd like to do is actually take it one step further. And now I can actually test this and I can see how many and what those are. But now what I'd like to do is let's save that. Now I'm back to my first dashboard. And let's say my level 1 analyst is here looking at this, and what happened? Well, all of a sudden I find that no, this was far more malicious than just a streaming attack here. What I find now is it looks like this employee, his logon credentials were attacked, and it looks like now there's access to these other systems. I can see that there was a mass file reading, and had I set up that alert where it immediately would have shut down the account, I could have stopped the attack. But what I'd like to do is dig in a little deeper. I want to see that timeline, right? Now what I can see is, well, it looked like there were some failed logons, and then sure enough, this person was actually out on PTO, and it looked like now this was trying to access other kinds of systems. So again, I'm pulling on that thread to be able to go in and see where else this goes. But now what I can do is I can go even deeper. I can say, what were the file names? What was it doing? Well, it was actually connecting. It was looking for other IP addresses. It was trying to respond. And more importantly, it was trying to find some of these things that we have in our malware that says, in fact, this indeed was a ransomware attack. So we have basically thwarted this. We have shut down the access and now actually stopped it before it happened. So again, this was simply a vignette to show kind of what we were able to do there. And what I'll do is I'll switch back to the PowerPoint over here. Now, what we want to do then is how did I do that? So that's great, Scott. But show me what those are. So again, with TigerGraph, what do I have at my fingertips? I have this enormous capability with the 70+ data science capability libraries, right? Whether it's clustering or betweenness or similarity, et cetera, all of these are at our fingertips inside of that studio. And what perhaps I want to do now is create these recipes. I want to start to concatenate those. So again, whether I'm using similarity or clustering or centrality, PageRank, et cetera, what I now can start to do is create those model strengths. And I can start to now, with a much higher accuracy, that's that superpower that we talked about how this can now increase the curve. Now, how does all this fit together? Well, we can use those streaming interfaces. We can do batch data loads. We can start to show what those connections are. And in the previous diagram, we showed that we can connect that data. So I can start to use a graph inside of TigerGraph to build the graph that I can start to query later. So in this case, I can create trust or risk. If I know that URLs or other kinds of MAC IDs or cookies or sessions are linked to other things, I can already create a trust matrix so that going forward, I know how I can shut that down quickly. The other element then is I can start to run those analytics as we showed before, which is where are they going? Is there a similarity? Is there an attack that I've had previously? And then ultimately what I want to do is in those user interfaces that I showed you, give those simple interfaces so that, again, the human can interact with this. Now, in this sort of simplistic model, what I see then is TigerGraph in the heart of this, right? What is it that we're doing? We're seeing all of that data. We're connecting all of that very complex and dependent data. And I am now able to do, using the power of the graph, ask it the questions that are important. Is this connected to fraud? Has this ever been connected to other fraudulent kinds of activities? And now I can start to do things here, which is a bit more complicated. So with all of this, I can start on any edge of this. So I can start over here on the right for the email and walk that entire graph in milliseconds to realize where those domains were coming from. Have there been previous alerts, et cetera? But the goal of this now is to do this in a very fast manner so that ultimately what I can do then is this process here, which is take what I see over here is after I run those graph algorithms, I can see now that things in blue or green, what those things are good going to bad, and then down in purple. I can train that subgraph inside of my TigerGraph instance so that now when I get real-time streaming data, I can in real time start to then say, this is either good, I should basically leave it alone, or if it's bad, I can immediately shut down things as I do that. And I'm using now these other kinds of elements. And if you've heard Victor Lee from TigerGraph speak of this, that's really where those data science libraries start to hide. Now, what that allows me to do then is I can use very complicated mechanisms to realize things like blast radius. I can use that endpoint data. I can use coloring in the graph. I can start to do very advanced kinds of things. And whether I do this again in TigerGraph Studio, et cetera, is up to each customer, but more specifically now where I'm going here is I'm looking at where those vectors are, and I can start to really nail those things down, because now I can start to look at prediction or other kinds of elements where I can denoise this and say, these are the nodes and this is the impact. I can also look for attack vector tracing, very similar kinds of things. So if code is injected, I can see where they're coming from, where those alerts are going, and then from the network, which is obviously what graphs are very, very good at, what are the effects or users, or again, blast radius on how we do those things. So again, we're doing all of this in real time, which is extremely sort of important in how we're stopping the cyber. Then from that blast radius, where have I been affected? How do I start to shut those down? How do I learn from previous events? How do I start to, whether it's communication, or if I have edge networks, and if I'm in a utility or energy, or I have other customers or people that are working from home these days, et cetera. How do I start to cordon those off so I can get even better? Then when I look at anomalies, were they indeed anomalies? Were they connected? Was this more going on? Was this something like footprint detection or phishing or man in the middle? Now what I can start to do is really break these things down, create transparency on how do I start to build or create these connections. And then, you know, in a graph, we can start to see then these color codings of what things are normal and what things are not normal. And we can see it actually in the geometry of the graph. We can see what these things look like. And again, these are all the underpinnings of what we were showing and what looked like very easy and pleasing user interfaces to the business user. But this again is the superpower of what a tiger graph can bring to the table. The other thing then is in some of our use cases, we've had customers that have said, no, we don't have any problems. Well, what we've been able to do is empirically show that by using the graph database, what looks like normal in a SQL environment now can actually very much expose where those threats are, and more importantly, where the risk is, again, with that higher accuracy. So again, empirically, this is what that graph database can do for you. Finally, now, there are some other webinars, and we've done some webinars with Tiger Graph. My friend David Braun has done some other ones that are out there as well as Xin Yu and Victor Lee. But again, what we were trying to show now is this ability to show how we use these machine learning algorithms. There are sort of recipes that are common as we start to do those different elements. But again, we can start to see what that outcome is inside of that. So wrapping up now, there is a fair amount of machine learning and capability inside of Tiger Graph, combined with that front end and then this active learning, this ability to monitor and have interpretability is really this 1-2 punch, using the superpower of the back end, using the simplicity and the visualization on the front end is where we started our journey today, right? Show how we get that accuracy, increase, decreasing false positives, and then more importantly, saving your organization, regardless of what industry you're in. So with that, just a quick wrap up. What you saw today is available. You can come visit us out here. We have lots of webinars. Tiger Graph, obviously, you can find this on their website as well. And we're here to help. With that, thanks so much for visiting today at the AI Summit, and look forward to talking to those of you out there if you have questions.